A warm, special welcome and thank you to all of you joining us from around the world today. My name is Nikki Stewart from Rock Jumper Birding Tours, Mauritius, together with my co-host Keith Valentine, our Managing Director of Rock Jumper Birding Tours, South Africa. We trust that you are all well, and we are honored that you have taken the time out of your schedules to join us today. We look forward to entertaining you with stories and plenty of interesting information featuring a bird family that we know is very special for many of you, hummingbirds. Please note that due to the large number of attendees joining us today, it is unlikely that we will be able to answer all of your questions during the presentation. There is, however, a chat feature and a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen where you can send your questions, and we will endeavor to answer these at the end of the webinar or via your chat or Q&A box. Our guest speaker today is our good friend and colleague, Forrest Rowland. Forrest has been leading tours for Rock Jumper for almost 10 years this August, and is Rock Jumper's tour leader manager. From the tender age of 9, he has had a lifelong love affair with birds and wildlife. Forrest has a technical education in genetics, but has since spent many years in the field honing his birding skills throughout the Americas. While Forrest leads tours for Rock Jumper across the globe, it is the Americas where he has almost unrivaled experience, being one of only a few people on the planet to have seen 3,000 species in South America alone. Keith and I chatted to Forrest this week, and we asked him, Forrest, why Rock Jumper? But more importantly, why birding? And he paused for a few seconds, and he spoke from his heart, saying, it's because of the belonging, how he feels embraced, how one can be able to enjoy and understand the world around us. Birding helps you learn about one aspect, and then it can take you all over the world. You get to know nature and the world, and in the end, show appreciation. Birds are everywhere you go, be it easy or challenging. One can connect with the natural world, and this is what makes him feel embraced, combining interest and comfort. Welcome, Forrest, and the virtual tour floor into the spectacular world of hummingbirds is yours.
Thank you so much, Nikki. It's a pleasure and an honor to have been invited to be a panelist and present to all of you today. An amazing turnout, which we appreciate you sharing your time and your enthusiasm and inquisitiveness about the world of birds with us today. And as Nikki mentioned, I've been a birder for most of my life. Also interested in all sorts of wildlife, but one family, above all, in my mind, sort of stands out as being New World specific and very unique to the Western Hemisphere, and that is the hummingbirds. And so today we're going to spend a little time looking at some of our favorite species, talking a bit about their natural history, and talking a bit about their evolution and how to attract them, all sorts of fun aspects of what's probably the most dynamic family of birds on Earth, the hummingbirds. So again, thank you for the warm welcome, Nikki, and we will begin our presentation. A flash of harmless lightning, a mist of rainbow dyes, a burnished sunbeam brightening from flower to flower he flies. The 360 recognized species of hummingbirds comprise the second highest species count for any bird family on Earth, only exceeded by tyrant flycatchers of the Americas. This slideshow includes 100 species and illustrates the beauty, diversity, and natural history of this fascinating group of birds. This happens to be one of my favorite quotes by the famous Alexander Scutch, who penned the first bird tome in the Neotropics about Costa Rica. To those who have the happy ability to find adventure among little things, I recommend the hummingbirds. And no other warm-blooded animals, perhaps no other living creatures of any kind, has nature managed to compress so much beauty, vitality, animation, and complex behavior into so small a compass. So we know we love hummingbirds, but how do these amazing, unique creatures evolve? Hummingbirds belong to the family Trochilidae. Trochilidae is part of an order of birds known as apodiforms, apodi meaning without feet. Hummingbirds do, of course, have feet that they use to perch with, though they are less functional than those feet of most birds. The order name is more appropriate to swifts, which are of the same order. Apodiforms would include the alpine swift, and swifts are found on every continent except Antarctica. They're also closely related to tree swifts, which range from Southeast Asia through the Indo-Pacific region to Australia. In 2013, a 50-million-year-old fossil bird was unearthed in Wyoming and found to be the predecessor of both hummingbirds and swifts before the groups diverged. This is a photo of that fossil found near Green River Valley, Wyoming. This is a photo of the oldest known hummingbird fossil. Dating back some 35 million years, this was surprisingly found in Germany. Since there are no hummingbirds in the Eastern Hemisphere anywhere, it was named Eurotrochilus unexpectata, which means unexpected European hummingbird. One of the most standout features of hummingbirds, of course, is their locomotion, their flight. How do the wings work? The wings work in a figure-8 motion. The motion supports 25% of the bird's weight on the upstroke, the other 75% of the weight on the downstroke. Thus, they're able to hover at their food sources and can move in 360-degree motion. And if you have some experience with hummingbird names, you're probably very curious about why they have such colorful, bizarre names, like this violet saberwing. Take the Calliope Hummingbird, for example, which was named after the Greek mythological figure thought to have been the muse of Homer's Iliad, Calliope. This beautiful western emerald is a bit more logical, as its name is just given to its color and distribution in Western Andes. The rainbow star frontlet's spectacular name is well deserved, given its equally beautiful plumage. And the snowcap's succinct name is as short and straightforward as the bird itself. Golden-tailed sapphire needs no explanation. Termally sun angel's namesake gorget color can only be seen from certain angles when looking down upon it. And this gorgeous fiery topaz is somewhat aptly named despite the fact that the topaz gemstone comes in a variety of colors. The widespread and beautiful sparkling violet ear is nonetheless dazzling. But one of my favorites, hooded visor bearer, is known from only a handful of sites in Brazil. Its name still puzzles me a little bit. Hummingbird common names can be terribly confusing. For example, we have Hispaniolan emerald. This is from the genus Chloristilbon. This emerald, the Andean emerald, is from a different genus entirely and very loosely related, Amazilia. This is also an emerald, the coppery-headed emerald from Costa Rica. It's from the genus Salvira and not closely related to any of the previous species, really. Similarly, this Rufus gaped hill star found in the cloud forest of western Colombia is only loosely related to the stunning Ecuadorian hill star, which lives in the freezing cold alpine habitats of its namesake country. Other than their names, hummingbirds have a very unique diet. Their primary caloric intake for food is flower nectar. They have evolved special elongated tongues attached to unique bone structures in their head to reach the nectar basin inside flowers. Their specialized tongues have hair-like structures called lamella and two little hollowed-out chambers towards the tip that aid in nectar collection. Of course, hummingbirds love to come to feeders, which is one of the many reasons why we love them. Hummingbird gardens are amazing. Wonderful places to relax and enjoy the antics and beauty of these easily attracted birds. And everybody enjoys watching hummingbirds, not just hardcore birders or photographers. Despite being attracted to hummingbird feeders by instinct, hummingbirds take advantage of natural food sources when available. Take this admirable hummingbird and lesser violet ear in Costa Rica coming to the same flower in between visits to some very nearby feeders. This white-whiskered hermit was coming to a native blooming plant only inches away from feeders being visited by a diverse number of local species. Even cactus flowers are host to hummingbirds in arid regions, like this recently described dry forest saberwing, endemic to cave systems in areas of northeast Brazil. While nectar makes up a large part of their diet, hummingbirds must get the nutrients and proteins provided by insects and spiders, of which hummingbirds will eat dozens daily. Here's a fun fact about hummers. They have the fastest metabolism of all animals, save for insectivora, with heart rates as high as 1,260 beats per minute and a breathing rate of 250 breaths per minute at rest. It takes hummingbirds mere minutes to process their food. Another truly remarkable thing about hummingbirds is their range of sizes. The smallest bird in the world is the male bee hummingbird. It measures 2.2 inches, weighs 2 grams, and has an equally minuscule distribution confined to western and central Cuba. The giant hummingbird, on the other hand, measures a whopping 8 inches or 20 centimeters and weighs 20 grams. No other family of birds on Earth displays such an exceptional range in size. Technically, the longest hummingbird is perhaps the beautiful long-tailed sylph. It can measure up to 1 centimeter longer than the giant hummingbird with a fully mature tail. Another exceptionally diverse feature of hummingbirds is their relative bill size and shape. For example, the tiny bill on this green-bearded helmet crest is among the smallest in relation to body length. At the other end of the spectrum is the magnificent sword-billed hummingbird. The unbelievable bill length of this species evolved in tandem with the species of host flowers. The host flowers, Datura and Brugmansia, have deep bell-shaped structures that the hummingbirds can feed from. Sword-billed hummingbirds are the only hummers that can access the nectar in these flowers, save for a few cheaters like this black-tailed train bear, which have learned to pierce the base of the flower to access the nectar. This scarce bird, the white-tipped sicklebill, evolved to feed from a certain type of heliconia flower. This flower requires a deeply curved bill to access the nectar. There are a few different feeding styles hummingbirds have evolved due to the both ephemeral and seasonal nature of their primary food source, as well as in response to aggressive territorial natures. The group of hummingbirds, perhaps the most unique among the 350 plus species, are the low-yield trapliners known as hermits. Hermits are predominantly brown, grayish, or greenish deep forest dwellers with decurved bills. They wag their long tails and sing in groups at sites called the lek, They sometimes visit garden flowers, but are mostly specialized to a few host plants within the forest. A few offshoots include the aberrant hermits, like this saw-billed hermit, which is only found in the Brazilian Atlantic rainforests, and the band-tailed barbthroat of Central American rainforests. But most typical hummingbirds are either high-yield trapliners or they are aggressive territorialists. High-yield trapliners have several flowers they visit in a day in their route. And more than 30% of hummingbird species become aggressive territorial feeders when stationary, constant food resources are found, such as hummingbird feeders, which is why most appear to be aggressive to us. In fact, far fewer are actually aggressive defenders of natural food sources in the wild. While many stake out a feeder or two that they do lord over, in the forest, they have to defend what food supply they find suitable. A recently published study from Brazil asserted that some hummingbird species sit on a food resource, as aggressive territorialists do, but decide to wait and feed only when the dominant species is away. These summers tend to be quite a bit shy, and they live at lower densities than some other species. Another feeding behavior type is the mimic or territorial parasite, which includes some of the most ornate and beautiful as well as tiniest hummingbird species on the planet. Coquettes and woodstars have evolved locomotive behaviors more similar to a bumblebee than that of a bird. Therefore, the much larger and more aggressive species leave them be. In fact, the territorial aggressors act as a sort of shield in many ways for these tiny hummingbirds, scaring off competitors, while these little gems sneak in and get their fill of nectar. Hummingbirds are dimorphic. The male and female of most species look different. In fact, some are so different, like these white-bellied woodstars, that you can hardly imagine that they're the same bird. Take, for example, the male and female black-throated mango. The male and female Brazilian ruby. Incredibly different. Hummingbirds can sing. Unfortunately, most hummers' songs have what's called a whisper song to display. In other words, you can barely hear it. You have to be very close. But male hummingbirds show off in many other ways to catch the eyes of a mate, like this black-crested coquette on his singing perch with his crazy head plumes. Male hummingbirds are the showier of the sexes typically, and they are adorned with all sorts of vibrant, gaudy colors and feathers. Take the crazy ear tufts of this sparkling violet ear, for example. How about the gorget tufts and crest of this tufted coquette in Trinidad? The crossed tail plumes of this black-billed streamer tail from Jamaica are used in display. And you can't forget the dazzling, bright red tail of the red-tailed comet from Argentina, or the tail of the long-tailed sylph. While plover crests are on the top contenders for best plumage and lekking behaviors, the king of all of the outlandish feather structures and the most amazing displays among hummingbirds is this species from Peru. The marvelous spatule tails display is so mesmerizing, it has been featured on many nature programs. It rivals the birds of paradise in its elaborate plumage and lekking behavior. But why do hummingbirds appear to shine and radiate colors the way that they do? And why is it only from certain angles? Hummingbird feathers have prismatic reflective properties, structural colors, that owe their brilliance to the feather structure itself, which is unique.
Hi,
feathers
Forrest.
themselves,
Forrest, I'm just going
yeah.
to cut in there. There's a bit of a lag time from the commentary and the photos. You might need to click through your photos and just pause for a few seconds and then talk for us. Thanks so
Oh,
much.
sure. Okay.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. So we have this long-billed starthroat here in Colombia. And so the feathers themselves are more pancake-like in structure, very thin, jam-packed with color-bearing melanosomes and air bubbles to reflect the colors. This makes them shine brilliantly at certain angles, but not from others. In fact, they might look very dull or black. But when light is cast upon them at the right angle, or you get a view of the colors and the feathers from the right perspective, the colors appear to glow spectacularly. Hummingbirds also have feathers with more typical structural properties like that of other birds. Colors like the warm Rufus of this cinnamon hummingbird. Unlike this velvet purple coronet, which is one of my very favorite hummingbirds, this coronet glows from head to toe. How do hummingbirds spend their time when they aren't feeding or showing off their colors? One thing they like to do is sunbathe. They like to soak up the warmth and dry out after a rain, for example. Or after having a nice bath. Which they do with a good amount of vigor. In the absence of a stream or pool, hummers can even use the morning dew off of large leaves to clean their feathers and bathe. Or they sit out happily in the rain. They also spend a good amount of time preening. Preening can take up to 20% of their waking time during the daylight hours. They also enjoy sitting regally on prominent perches, looking out over their territories to ward off would-be intruders, as well as maintaining their claim to a preferred food source. They spend much of their time disputing other visiting hummingbirds, edging into their claim. And yes, of course, hummingbirds do sleep. They also nest. Most species only nest once a year, but with hummingbird feeders available, they might attempt 2 clutches. This interesting nest is that of a hermit, which tends to be made out of moss, tree mulch, leaves, and spider webs, which are used to affix it to a sturdy, broad leaf in the dark understory of the rainforest. Despite their small size and speed, hummingbirds have predators, like this rainbow boa. Other bird species, such as this ferruginous pygmy owl, pose a threat, as birds comprise a large part of the owl's diet.
Hi, Forrest. I got a lovely request. I know we're doing Q&A at the end now, but
Yeah.
they have asked if you could mention a few more species names as you go along.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you.
And hummingbirds must be vigilant not to give themselves or their nest sites away to the likes of toko toucans, which is an effective nest predator. So where do we find hummingbirds like this rufous-tailed hummingbird? And what habitats are they found in? Another rufous-tailed hummingbird here, which is equally widely distributed in the lowlands, as is the black-throated mango. Both can be found almost throughout the neotropics. Buff-tailed coronets are widespread in the Andes Mountains of South America. As is the lovely collared Inca, which can be found in subtropical forests throughout. There are 360 species of hummingbirds currently recognized by the IOC. This photo is of a male bee hummingbird in Cuba. The vast majority are found in the tropics, with the highest diversity in the subtropic zone of the Andes. But you can find hummingbirds almost anywhere in the New World. Like in the desert mountainscapes of the southwestern United States. These are the Chiricahua Mountains in Arizona. One might see a dozen species on a trip in the area. Like this Costa's hummingbird, which is perched on a blooming ocotillo. The Amazilia hummingbird inhabits correspondingly arid parts of Ecuador and Peru. While this Buffy hummingbird is only found on the exceptionally sparse, very dry Guajira Peninsula of northern Colombia. Most hummingbirds are found in the forested parts of the world. Though not the richest in terms of hummingbird diversity, lowland humid forests host a variety of nice species, like you can see from the canopy tower in Panama. Good examples, the beautiful snowy bellied hummingbird from Costa Rica, or the sapphire throated hummingbird from Panama. One of my favorites is the small violet bellied hummingbird found in Panama and Colombia, as well as the plumeletiers, like this bronze-tailed plumeletier from Costa Rica, or white-vented plumeletier in Colombia. The foothills of the Andes harbor far more diversity as one moves into the subtropical zone. Gould's jewel front is among the more striking foothill residents. It also ranges out to the upper Amazon. The white-throated hummingbird is a resident of lower subtropic forests in the mountains of Brazil. While this gorgeous, shining green hummingbird inhabits foothill forests of central and northern Colombia. The middle elevation subtropics, also known as cloud forest, have the highest diversity of species. Many of those species, like this emerald-bellied puffleg, are absolutely stunning. Some species tend towards the more plain, but have very small, specialized distributions, like this green and white hummingbird, or like this Rufus saberwing from Guatemala. Most subtropic hummingbirds, like the stunning male Empress Brilliant from Colombia, are very bright. or this beautiful royal sun angel which shines blue across its entire body. This is only found on a few Andean ridges in southeast Ecuador and northeast Peru. Perhaps one of the favorites of all is the jaw-dropping violet-tailed sylph, endemic to the Choco region cloud forests of southwest Colombia and northwest Ecuador. The high mountain elevations of the Americas are home to nearly as much diversity as the cloud forests. Subtropic and temperate forests of Central and South America have, and perhaps even more, limited range species. A few examples of these awesome species include the fiery-throated hummingbird from Costa Rica and Panama, or the purple-throated sun angel from Ecuador, and both the purple-throated mountain gem and lovely gray-tailed mountain gem from Costa Rica. Another crowd pleaser and all-time favorite is the booted racket-tail, which is widespread in Colombia, Ecuador, and parts of Peru. Frigid alpine grasslands and elfin forests cannot support anywhere near the diversity as the warmer, lower elevation habitats, but the few species do thrive in this extreme climate. They tend to be specialized, local, and interesting. For example, the very rare coppery metal tail from Peru, the beautiful purple-backed thornbill from Colombia, and then you have the uber specialists like dusky star frontlet and gray-bellied comet, each of which are practically known from about one accessible site each. But perhaps the most interesting and endearing thing about hummingbirds is their willingness to come to us. No other group of backyard birds inspires as much interest or awe as the hummingbirds can do. While some attempts to attract hummingbirds to our domiciles are much less modest, plantings and a few feeders can go a very long way. For example, we have gorgeous, colorful plants like salvia and various members of the lily family, which offer a good nectar source and add aesthetic beauty to our gardens while attracting hummingbirds. But sometimes the more modest flowers, like verbena, also known as porterweed, are even more effective. We hope you've enjoyed today's webinar presentation covering one of my favorite families of birds, the hummingbirds, like this green-crowned brilliant. This beautiful collared Inca, and the rare Tolima blossom crown. All thank you for your time joining us today. And we appreciate you spending a little time with us to talk about and look at a few of my favorite hummers. And yeah, this was a huge collaborative effort with a few of us on the team here, and we appreciate you joining us. And I'd be happy to run through if somebody, if we want to go through some of the slides to identify various species, and of course we can take individual questions as to which is which. So yeah, I'll let our gracious host take it away.
Absolutely, yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Forrest. I know there were a couple of issues with some of the sound and picture quality sort of coming through from time to time, so apologies for that, but we do have a few questions coming through in the Q&A, Forrest, which is great. Cool. So yeah, let's start here at the top. Just around the pictures that were taken. I know it's a collaboration with quite a few folks, but so just wondering what kind of settings are being used to take those beautiful, beautiful pictures that we saw.
It kind of depends, of course, on how much natural lighting is available or what your artificial lighting setup is. But for example, like this Tolima blossom crown, you can tell it's natural lighting, and you're gonna want at least 1/1600th of a second exposure time. As long as you can handle that and have enough light in the image, you can freeze the bird often enough. What you really want to do is get up to 1/2000th if you can. And so we try to gauge that. And again, as light changes during the course of your stakeout at the flower or at the feeder, which again, just in practice and technique is the best thing to do, since hummingbirds usually return to a flower from a perch that they'll also return to. You can kind of stake those out and just be aware of the lighting conditions while you're observing them. And you have to kind of change your settings and compensation accordingly. But you definitely want 1/1600th or 1/2000th of a second to get anything looking like a good flight shot.
Fantastic. Yeah, great tips there, Forrest. Absolutely. And as you say, shutter speed, very, very important. So another question that's come through: have any species of hummingbird gone extinct in recent decades, or are there any that are in danger of extinction?
Wow, many in danger of extinction. Sure. I mean, I guess one of the more like turquoise-throated puffleg. There are a few, mostly in South America, that have either been declared extinct or are presumed extinct, that have gone so in the last, say, 40, 50 years. There are many that are critically endangered due to either habitat loss or some sort of, it could be a local climatic change, etc. But the biggest threats to most hummingbirds are certainly habitat loss. In this slideshow, there were a few. Tolima blossom crown's a pretty good example, the current slide that we're on. It has a very, very small range in the central Andes of Colombia. And its counterpart, the Santa Marta blossom crown, has a very, very small range only in the Santa Marta Mountains of northern Colombia. So those are two good examples of how hummingbirds with naturally small ranges, which there are plenty of because they have specialized to one flower or a few flower types, can be easily affected if their habitat is infringed upon.
Great. Thanks for that, Forrest. Another little interesting question. Any reason for the fluffy boots of the pufflegs?
Actually, yeah. There have been a couple studies done on that, and it is pretty fascinating. They presume it has to do with a thermoregulatory adaptation, because you don't really see hummingbirds in the lower, hotter areas with boots, but you tend to see the hummingbirds that are up in like the subtropics and temperate forests, like booted racket tail and some of these that very much do benefit from having those boots to cover their soft parts, the feet.
Lovely. That's great. Someone else asking as well, do we have tours that focus primarily on hummingbirds? Obviously, we have a lot of tours through Central and South America that have a lot of hummingbird species available. But yeah, maybe Forrest, you want to just touch on some of the tours that we offer that really focus on large numbers of hummingbirds, or where hummingbirds are really, a prime feature of the tour.
Well, I mean, I think, Costa Rica, Panama, but especially Ecuador and Colombia, tours in Ecuador and Colombia. Again, the highest diversity of hummingbirds is in the subtropic kind of cloud forests of the mountains of the Andes. And yeah, we have certain tours that get 60, 70 species of hummingbirds, really staggering number of hummingbirds. And given that we're very aware of how charismatic they are and how fun they are, a lot of the tours in Ecuador, Costa Rica, Colombia, we tend towards lodgings where hummingbird feeders or gardens are available. And we do spend time on most of the tours to those countries. We dedicate a bit of time watching those so people can really appreciate and enjoy them with a little bit of downtime at some cool gardens and feeder setups.
Nice, nice. I guess the Colombia mega tour, for example, will probably be the tour where you get the biggest variety of species. What's your record for hummingbirds on that particular tour? Do you remember offhand?
I think it's 80 plus, maybe 82, 84. It's a huge amount. Yeah. It's about a third or so of all the hummingbird species on the planet can get in one fell swoop. So yeah, Colombia and northern Ecuador, just amazing. But you know, the marvelous spatule tail and royal sun angel of northern Peru, you know, I think if there are some must-see hummingbirds in the world, I think the sylphs and the marvelous spatule tail are right up there. Yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah, someone else asking here, Forrest, what are some of your favorite destinations for hummers? And I guess you've touched on that to some degree, and birding in general. So just a little more personal question for you.
Well, for me, I mean, I love hummingbirds. So, you know, anywhere that has such a good variety of hummingbirds is fantastic. So yeah, I do tend towards Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, etc. Now, that being said, the visor bearers in Brazil are also pretty spectacular. So from a birding standpoint in general, just from an aesthetics and sort of interest in specialized and rare endangered species, I would say that, you know, Colombia and Brazil are very high on my list of favorite places to lead and to explore and spend some time in the fields on my own. I love those countries very much.
Fantastic. And then another one, just asking about defining trapliner. When you spoke earlier about trapline,
Absolutely.
You know, just a little bit more about that.
A trap line, they sort of just took that from, you know, old world trapping, but it's a common term applied to hummingbirds that they will vary a daily routine that is a feeding route. And so they will visit a variety of flowers, and a low yield trap liner has to cover more traps or more flowers, more area, because there's not much nectar or the nectar is not of high caloric value. Whereas a high yield trap liner can spend a little more time at each flower. So they cover less distance, but they get a higher caloric intake from the food resources that's available along their little routes. Whereas, you know, we talked about the territorialists, and they'll find something that has a high caloric value, and they'll try and lock it down and scare all the other hummingbirds off so they can keep it for themselves. So yeah, those are a few of the different feeding behaviors that hummers have evolved to, you know, to get through, because yeah, they're not too many minutes worth of energy away from running out at certain times of the day. So they really have to stay on top of that, and to be able to you know, lower their metabolism while they sleep, and in the morning that food source has got to be there.
Yeah. Absolutely. It is. It's very interesting watching just the dynamics at a sort of feeding area, what have you, and which hummingbirds are the aggressors, which are the most dominant species, etc. It's fascinating, all the goings on. So yeah, another question of what are the molting patterns? Do they vary and differ between migratory hummingbirds to those that are sort of more sedentary?
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, the short answer is yes to the second question. Yeah, you know, ruby-throated hummingbird, for example, migrates across the Gulf of Mexico from North America down to the Yucatan and points in Central America. Some will go overland, but it's a huge distance for a very small bird that is constantly in need of energy to travel. So they do want their feathers in best shape when they do so. So yeah, the molting patterns of the feathers often coincide with that migration. And of course, there's a bit more feather wear during nesting. And so a lot of the molt timing has to do with food source and the time of year that the bird is most stressed, such as during nesting. So you tend to have a different timing for species that live at different elevations in the mountains or have a different habitat.
Very interesting. So, yeah, we've got a lot of questions coming through here, which is
Cool.
fantastic. And you finished in good time for us. So yeah, if you're willing to hang around for a while, we can run through a bunch of these and chat about them. So yeah, folks, if you want to stay online and listen to some of these questions, there's some interesting questions that a lot of you have posed. We'll try and answer as many as possible with Forrest. So yeah, moving on, Forrest. Someone's asking, how do these birds actually capture insects?
A lot of times they'll do it on the wing. One of the slides that we had a bit earlier, I might actually jump out of the presentation screen and we can grab a couple slides while we're talking about that, if that's okay. And so we've got a few of these guys. And I'll kind of come a little bit forwards to one of my favorite slides. For example, this photograph, this image of the long-billed starthroat was taken while the starthroat was hawking insects. And so what they will do is they'll go over, it's usually over a water source like a river, lake, pond, in the morning and in the evening when the insects, are starting to rise and starting to get busy. And the hummingbirds will take most of those flying insects on the wing. Another slide that we used as well was the shining sunbeam. Again, the shining sunbeam, which was actually gleaning insects from one of the flower pods. So spiders actually make up a huge amount of their intake of protein and nutrients. So they spend a lot of time picking spiders off of things as well.
Nice, thanks, Forrest. Just another one we mentioned earlier and touched on, obviously, the countries around the world where you can see the most hummingbirds, and you'd mentioned Ecuador and obviously Colombia. So one of our guests just popping up here and saying that on one of their Rock Jumper Northern Peru tours, they had over 70 species of hummers as well. So and you mentioned marvelous statual tail and the sun.
That's a good one.
As being highlights, but yeah, also massive numbers on northern Peru as well, which is very interesting. Right, another great question here. So is there a theory about their ability to see color? And if red is the color that they're attracted to, So the question is, how true is the attraction to red? And then why isn't red seen sort of more in their feathers?
What they're sort of attracted to in terms of color is a little different than what they'd be attracted to in terms of food. I mean, not to anthropomorphize too much, but you don't necessarily want your mate to resemble your food. So yeah, there's a little bit of difference in color preference there, but they definitely do have very strong receptors towards low frequency colors, reds, oranges, yellows. But the prismatic nature of their feathers also, it's not been confirmed, but it leaves a little bit of speculation as to what the feather patterns look like to other hummingbirds versus what it looks like to us. With the melanosomes and the air bubbles giving that sort of iridescent kind of sheen, like you can see in this marvelous spatula tail, they would probably see a lot more yellow and green and orange and whatnot coming in at the edge there, probably than we would. But they do, in terms of being able to detect low frequency colors, reds, oranges, yellows, etc., at great distances, they can. But it's, not completely certain necessarily what the color spectrum would look like for colors that are used more towards mating and displays. Most hummingbirds have very elaborate flight displays. So while we're kind of drawn as humans to the colors and the iridescence, I think a lot of the mating hummingbirds, the females, make a lot of judgment call based on the actual act of the display that's put on by the male, rather than just the male's adornments and colors.
Great, thanks, Forrest. So one of the, I guess, a classic question, and you get this quite frequently on tours as well, and obviously there's a similarity between the two birds to some degree, but what is the difference between a hummer and a sunbird?
The difference between a hummer and a sunbird, it's really, they came from very different origins in terms of original, ancestral species. And so we talked kind of in the beginning about how swifts and hummingbirds were found to come from the same ancestor, one of which was found in Wyoming. And sunbirds come from a very, very different ancestor. And so they arrived to the same food source via very different evolutionary kind of, it's essentially a convergent evolution based on food supply. And so they've come towards each other, but only really in terms of feeding behavior. They're not closely related whatsoever.
Yeah. Excellent. So another one here, just someone was reading recently that bees obviously affect nectar production of flowers, and they were just wondering if hummingbirds likely do the same. Would that be correct?
I think. Again, I don't have a study off the top of my head to reference it, but I have read some materials that concluded that nectar production was sort of stimulated to attract hummingbirds, which are pollinators. And so yes, I mean, I think the short answer would be yeah. Again, don't have an article to like detail it too much, but yeah, nectar production, enhanced nectar production. Makes the plant more attractive to hummingbirds, which will then become more likely to pollinate it.
Makes sense. So yeah, a few questions here just around the same sort of theme around feeding and what have you. There's another one here, just discussion on hummingbird feeders, and there's quite a bit of talk apparently with them disrupting the natural feeding patterns of hummingbirds. Do you feel that that's a concern?
Well, it seems like again, there actually have been a couple studies done in the last decade about how the population of hummingbirds around really elaborate hummingbird feeding residencies and stuff, like how that affected the populations. So they have sort of a general control sample, which will say in this habitat with no hummingbird feeders, you have this many of this kind. What seems to happen is hummingbird numbers skyrocket in terms of population density. They nest more, etc., around hummingbird feeder setups. When the setup is removed, there is a corresponding drop in that population, but it relatively quickly seems to return to the normal equilibrium and the natural population number of hummingbirds that was there or would be there without the hummingbird feeders. So, I mean, the answer seems to be yes, it does affect it, but so far it tends to augment it from what they've studied and found. It doesn't seem to have necessarily a negative effect. Unfortunately, of course, the first couple generations that grew up with these hummingbird feeders, when they nest and the hummingbird feeders are taken away, they're going to have to go out and learn the hard way to go visit those natural food sources. But like a few of the slides kind of showed as well, like I remember the white-whiskered hermit slide in particular, this white-whiskered hermit was coming to a natural food source, and here we go, this guy. And there were like 10 hummingbird feeders right next to it. It went to the hummingbird feeder as well, but it also came to this really nectar-rich flower that was right there too. So I mean, kind of point being, just as with garden plants that are high in nectar, which aren't necessarily native species to the region. The hummingbirds are there because they were born into and evolved to that habitat. And so they know where the natural food sources are as well.
Great. Thanks, Forrest. So yeah, and then another one, do they mainly supplement diet with protein, so insects while breeding, or in the colder weather? Does it have an effect?
So it turns out that studies have shown that that hummingbirds, like many other birds, are quite effective hunters, and they are very vigorous about it. So some hummingbirds, and it depends somewhat on time of year. Certainly at nesting, it has to go up a little bit for the nutrients to be passed on to the young. But yeah, even on a day-to-day basis, most adult hummingbirds will eat dozens and dozens of flying insects and small arthropods, like little spiders. So even in the time of the year when they're not nesting, they'll definitely be eating insects as well. And again, that kind of goes back to, if you look at the swifts, which they're most closely related to, those live entirely off of flying insects. And so they kind of come from an evolutionary standpoint of, they basically started off as insectivores exclusively, and then they adapted to get a caloric intake off of blooming plants. And so I try and think of them as, they're almost like very, very colorful flycatchers. But they're, you know, we most frequently see them at hummingbird feeders and at flowers, and just assume that that's all they're doing. But very much not the case. They spend a lot of time on a given day, any day, catching insects.
I think we've got time for one more question. We've got so many questions here, so if we haven't answered your question, we will endeavor to do it via email after in the next 24 hours. But I think just one question left now for this session.
Great. So yeah, the final one, I guess we can, maybe let's go to the most sort of personal question, Forrest, that came through. What is your, and it's a kind of a two part. So what's your favorite hummingbird memory, and what is the hummingbird that you most want to see?
I think, the last one's hard. I'd have to think about what hummingbirds I haven't seen. I don't think.
Have you seen them all? Yeah, that's the problem.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Yeah, wow. I can't think of a hummingbird I haven't seen. Let me get back. We'll work on the first part of that question. So I think one of my favorite hummingbird memories was, there's a place in Colombia at Los Nevados, close to Los Nevados National Park, high in the central Andes, like up at 10,000, 11,000 feet, right where the forest stops and gives way to above tree line. And there's a little hot springs, kind of a hotel lodge there. And they're the first place, and the owners there are the first kind of entrepreneurs in this regard to purchase and kind of make these little tiny hummingbird feeders with little blossoms on it that you can hold in your hand. And so you go there and they give these out to you. And at one point I had 2 different species of hummingbirds perched on my hand, eating from this hummingbird feeder that I was holding. And that was pretty spectacular. One of them was great sapphire wing, which is almost as large as a giant hummingbird and bright green with glowing blue wings. And it's big enough to where I could actually feel a little bit of heft, just a little bit, but a little bit of heft on my hand as it perched there. But I think that's one of the more amazing memories for me. That was the first time it actually had, you know, multiple species of hummingbirds landing on me at once. Another one was when I had volunteered to help a friend out in Ecuador while he was abroad filling up his feeders, and I go out with this big bucket of nectar, of sugar water, and the hummingbirds were so excited that morning for the feeders to get refilled that they were perching on my shoulder, my head, sitting all around the lip of this massive, you know, 5-gallon like jug of nectar water, that sugar water that was going to go around and fill up. Have like 28 hummingbird feeders there. So anyways, so many amazing hummingbird memories, some with a lot of scenery and just incredible backdrops that are impossible to really convey accurately here, but hooded visor bears on top of Paimoro, and I don't know, so many good ones.
Thank you so much.
Endless,
Thank you, and I see that's our time. Thank you so much, Forrest. Really was great listening to you. And just for the audience, next week we are back to Asia, where South African-based tour leader Daniel Dankwitz will be showcasing one of the most pristine countries of the planet, Bhutan. This beautiful part of the world is high up on many people's wish lists, and for a good reason. So unique in so many ways, Daniel will be highlighting many of the country's top draw cards, including its fascinating culture, remarkable scenery, and intriguing wildlife. Join us as we explore the home of Bhutan. And also a reminder that our webinars are recorded and can be viewed later. The links will be available within the next 48 hours on our webpage. And these webinars are being offered free of charge, but should you wish to donate towards our tour leaders, we have a GoFundMe link that is open still, and all proceeds, 100% of the proceeds, are going to our guides. Thank you again to everyone for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again next week, Wednesday at the same time. Thank you so much. From all of us from the Rock Jumper team, thank you and goodbye.